Shalom, shalom, Mishpachah. Let's take a look at this sharp, two-edged sword from a Hebraic perspective. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 1, verses 16 through 20. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp, two-edged sword, and his face was as the sun shining in its strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he placed his right hand on me, saying, Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one, the one who was, the one who will be, the one who is. And I became dead, and see, I am living forever and ever. Amen. I possess the keys of Sheol and of death. Write therefore what you have seen, both what is now and what shall take place after these. The secret of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands. The 7 stars are the messengers of the 7 assemblies, and the 7 lampstands which you saw are 7 assemblies. I just want to mention a couple things here. We see that in verse 20 it tells us the 7 stars in his right hand are the messengers of the 7 assemblies. We see them mentioned in verse 16. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp, two-edged sword, and his face was as the sun shining in its strength. And I find it to be very interesting that right at the point where he's talking about the messengers of the 7 assemblies, who are the 7 stars, at that very point it says, and out of his mouth went a sharp, two-edged sword. So those seem to really go hand in hand, and we'll see as we look further. Let's take a closer look at this phrase, out of his mouth went a sharp, two-edged sword. First, from out of, G1537. A primary preposition denoting origin, the point whence motion or action proceeds. From, out of place, time, or cause, literally or figuratively, direct or remote. The first time that Numbers 30 verse 2 is mentioned there, we see it on the bottom line of the first time it's mentioned, from out of, we see our G1537. At the next time it's mentioned, we see it at the end of the verse, out of his mouth. We see H4480 and H6310, which is mouth. And the last section, which is the interlinear Hebrew Old Testament, we see it at the bottom line of his mouth. At the very beginning of his mouth, we see a mem that is actually a prefix, a modern day Masoretic prefix that this would trace back to. In looking at another time this G1537 is traced back into the Old Testament, we see it at Genesis 2:6. The first time Genesis 2:6 is mentioned there in the middle of the screen, we see our from out of G1537, and then underneath that in the King James, a mist from H4480, the earth. And then when we look down here in the interlinear Hebrew Old Testament, we see that that from is now a mem nun, again H4480. Taking a look at the Strong's 4480 comes, it's 44482, properly a part of, hence prepositionally from or out of in many senses. In looking at it in the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon, we see it's at 1290 MN. The N has 2 different definitions. 1 is kind, a category of species. 2 is from. Hebrew and Aramaic, the short form mem is used as a prefix meaning from. So we see, kind of a rendition of both words that we saw. And it says it came from 4482, which is in the same root line. What, also who or where, and at the A we see the concrete as portion, or the abstract as what. What comes from something else, as one kind comes from the same. The 2-letter root is the mem nun. The action is firm, the concrete is kind, and the abstract is sure. The mem is water or other liquids such as blood. The nun is a picture of a seed representing continuance. Combine these mean blood continues. Blood is also has a meaning of the likeness of something in the Hebrew as well. Each species kind continues by passing its blood to the following generation, which comes from the parent. Also the idea of strength through the blood. So we see this out of his mouth went. What came out of his mouth is like kind after like kind. That you can stand firm on. It is for sure, and it is for certain. Looking at this word from an ancient perspective, it is my opinion we would not have seen prefixes in the ancient Hebrew. So some of these places where they've added prefixes and suffixes, I don't really think they should be there. However, there are places where we have this word in its entirety or the two-letter root together. So we also see in the Greek it was a preposition. Lots of times you see this preposition attached to another word. And when you bring those two together, it creates a different word in the Greek, sometimes with a different meaning, sometimes it kind of takes on the meaning of the second one. So when you trace these words back and you look them up in the Greek concordance to the Septuagint or the polyglot, whichever one you're using, it's context, context, context. Times there's the prefix doesn't need to be taken off, and you need to go with the word that the two are combined with, depending on the context. Sometimes you have to use the second word with the prefix unattached to it, depending on the context. Because we're not trying to think like a Greek. We're trying to come back to an ancient Hebrew perspective in our way of study and in our way of thinking about the scriptures. So we see out of his mouth went this sharp two-edged sword. The word is also going forth in the polyglot. So the word went, or going forth, is the Strong's G1607. It comes from 1537 and 4198 to depart, be discharged, proceed, project. So the two parts of that word are the preposition that we already looked at, G1537, a primary preposition denoting origin, etc., and the 4198. To traverse, that is travel, literally or figuratively, especially to remove, figuratively die, live, etc. That word actually traces back to the H1980, which is halak. So you, again, have to think about context, context, context. Are we going to trace back the G1607? Or are we going to remove that primary preposition it's attached to and just trace back the G4198? Context, context, context. I lay before you life and death. Choose life. The life is from his word. The life is from the sword. The sword is the word, and it comes out of his mouth. So let's trace back the 1607 and see if we don't find it in context. Tracing the Greek 1607 back, we find it at Numbers 32:24. There we see our G1607. And in the King James Plus off the eSword, we see it at H33:18. We also see it traces back to Deuteronomy 8:3 about living by every word going forth, G1607. We see that in the King James Plus, again off the eSword, at the bottom, very bottom of the screen there. We don't see the word word, it's in italics, but the proceedeth forth, the going out, actually goes to H4161. So let's see where these words come together at. Strong's H4161 that we saw in Deuteronomy 8:3 comes from, or so the Strong says, H33:18, a going forth, that is the act, an egress, or the place, an exit, hence a source or product, specifically dawn, the rising of the sun, the east, exportation, utterance, a gate, a fountain, a mine, a meadow, as producing grass. So we see it means a going forth. Says it comes from 33:18, yatsah, a primitive root, to go, causatively bring out, in a great variety of applications. literally or figuratively, direct or proximate. There we see a very good rendition of the Greek word that we were talking about. In the ancient Hebrew lexicon, we find these two words at 1392. They're both in the L line. The 4161 is at L, little a, little m. Going out, something that is going out, coming, or issuing out, such as a spring. And the 3318 is at the V, which is verb, go out, to go out, come, or issue out. The one thing I do want to say about this is that the two little A's there don't match up with the three-letter child root there. We've got a wa instead of a yod. So while I think that they are absolutely in the correct root line, they may quite possibly belong under a different family. The whole idea, though, is a coming out, point of origin, to issue out, something that is going, coming, or issuing out of something else. We see the two-letter root, the zadi el. The action is issue. The concrete is excrement. I can guarantee you for sure and for certain that's not what came out of our Messiah's mouth. But what it did was take care of all the dung that would be, everything else counted as rubbish, everything else counted as dung, except for the word, that sword that comes from his mouth. The zod is a picture of a man laying down or squatting to issue out of something. This parent root is related to the zod wa. So just a little information on this going out. It is a going out, just as our G1607 with the preposition and the other word were attached together, so we get the same definition here. So what is this that goes forth? Ephesians 6:17, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of Elohim. When you do a Greek analysis on this verse, and you look at the bottom of this chart that's here, we see which is word Elohim. The is not there, and the of is not there. It's simply sword of the Spirit, which is word Elohim. Thus telling us that the Spirit is the word, the sword is the Spirit, the sword is the word, and they're all Elohim. As some of you can probably see, the word for sword here is not the same word for sword that's in Revelation 1:16. The word for word here is not the same word as logos. However, in tracing each of these words for sword and for word back through the Greek concordance to the Septuagint, you end up at debar, and you end up at the same word for sword that you have in Revelation 1:16. So while you may be having two different Greek words, we're not looking to be thinking like a Greek would. We're looking to take these back to an ancient Hebrew cultural perspective and to be looking at things as they would have in context Hebraically. So let's take a look at a couple passages here that show us that oneness. Psalm 33:6. By debar Yahweh the heavens were made, and all their host by the spirit of his mouth. Here we have the word Yahweh, the of is not there, word debar Yahweh, debar Yah, as we can see right below it in the interlinear Hebrew Old Testament. There's no prefixes, there's no suffixes, there's none of that going on. So the word made the heavens, and the spirit of his mouth made the hosts. Which one was it, the word or the spirit? They're one and the same. Taking a look at John 6, verses 60 to 71, therefore, many of his taught ones having heard said, this word is hard, who is able to hear it? But Yah, who came to rescue us, knowing within himself, because he knew within himself, that his taught ones were grumbling about this, said to them, does this make you stumble? What if you see the son of Enosh, the husband, going up where he was before, because he was there before, and he's always been there. It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh does not profit at all. The words that I speak to you are spirit and are life. The words are spirit, the words are life. When Yah, who came to rescue us, was speaking these words, he was speaking his spirit, he was speaking life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Yeshua knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe, and who would deliver him up. And he said, because of this I have said to you that no one is able to come to me unless it has been given to him by my Father. From then on, many of his taught ones withdrew and were not walking with him any more. Yeshua therefore said to the 12, do you also wish to go away? Then Shimon Kepha answering him, Master, to whom shall we go? You possess the words of everlasting life. The words are spirit, the words are life, they are everlasting. He was the Word. He is the Spirit wrapped in flesh, because the Father is the Spirit, who first breathed himself into creation. And we have believed and we have known that you are the Messiah, the great high priest, the great prophet, the King of kings, the house's seed of the living Elohim. Yeshua answered them, have I not chosen you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He was now speaking of Yehuda from Kirioth, the son of Shimon, for he, one of the 12, was about to deliver him up. So in here we see that the word that he spoke was spirit and life. Those words were spirit and life. Debar Yahweh, which made the heavens and all the host by the spirit of his mouth. They're all one. They cannot be separated. Let's take a real quick look at what Isaiah has to say on this. Isaiah 55, 6 through 11. Seek Yah while he is to be found. Call on him while he is near. Now is the time. Let the wrong forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to Yah, who has compassion on him, and to our Elohim, for he pardons much. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares Yah. He cannot be put in a man-made frame of mind. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. His thoughts are not man-made ways of thinking. For as the rain comes down, and the snow from the heavens, and do not return there, but water the earth, and make it bring forth bud, and give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but shall do what I please, and shall certainly accomplish what I sent it for. So looking at verse 11, which we've looked at least in the last video, so shall my debar exist that goeth forth out of my mouth. The sharp two-edged sword goes out of his mouth. The sword is the spirit, which is the word Elohim. Which is it? It shall not return void. What doesn't return void to him, the spirit or his word? But it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper whereto I sent it. The word being brought forth is the spirit, because nothing else can return to him except that which is spirit and in order, which is where the word debar comes from, and in truth. And this word does tell us to do works. We cannot be hearers only, even hearing of our own selves talking, because his thoughts are not our thoughts. Our ways are not his ways. We must be doers from the perspective of love, as he has set forth. Let's move on and take a look at this sharp two-edged sword. In the Greek, it's 3691, probably akin to the base of 188, acid. Keen, by analogy, rapid. In the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, we see keen as sharp, having a very fine edge, as a keen razor or a razor with a keen edge. We say keen edge, but a sharp point. Looking at the word sharp in the 1828, having a very thin edge or a fine point, keen, acute, not blunt. Thus, we may say a sharp knife, which would have sharp edges, or a sharp needle, which would have a sharp point. A sharp edge easily severs a substance. A sharp point is easily made to penetrate it. Tracing it back through the Apostolic Bible polyglot, we see it in Isaiah 49 verse 2. And he made my mouth as sword as sharp. The word sharp there we see it is G3691. And looking in the King James, we see sharp goes to H2299. In the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon, it's 1165 AN, chad. It's the second definition. The two edges of a sword that meet to form one point. The two-letter root, the het dal. The pictograph het is a picture of a wall. The dal is a picture of a door. Combined, these mean wall door. A wall separates the inside from the outside. Only through the door can one enter or exit, uniting the inside with the outside. So here we have this wall that separates the inside from the outside. This sharp edge easily severs a substance, keeping one on the inside and one on the outside. And there's only one way in, and that's the door. And it's Yah who came to rescue us. It's His Word. It's His Spirit. It's all Him. So I just wanted to take a quick look at sharp and move on to double-edged. We see double-edged in the Greek as 1366. It comes from 1364 and 4750. Tracing it back, we find it at Psalm 149:6, Hebrews 63:74, Proverbs 5:4, Hebrews 63:10, and in Judges 3:16, we see its two words, H8147 and H6366. So why are we looking at the fact that it traces back to three different words? Let's go up to the Greek Strong's definition from 1364, which traces back to 2, H8147. And the other part of that is the G4750. If you look in the verse in Revelation 1:16, at mouth, you see that it's G4750. So we see that proceeding out of the mouth is this double-edged sword. The sharp edge severs the substance. It separates one side from the other. It is a clean cut. There is nothing blunt or jagged about it. The mouth is this double-edged sword. His word is double-edged. We've heard many times maybe in our walk, it cuts both ways. Okay, it cuts both ways. It absolutely severs what's going to be on the inside from what is going to be on the outside. Let's just take a look at this double-edged in the Hebrew. The 6366 from the Judges verse is piyah. It's a feminine of 6310. 6310 is mouth. And edge. It's at 1378 A and 1 an edge. The definition right below that in the root line is a double edge. That's the 6374. We see that it's a feminine, simply a feminine of pay. 1373 AN, which is the mouth. The action is to blow. The concrete is the mouth. The pay is the mouth. A mouth is the edge of anything, such as the place of the beard, a sword, a region. The edge or border is often referring to all that is within the borders, the whole country. Then it talks about a couple other identical parent roots. So we see that this double-edged, the edges of the mouth are sharp. They are going to cut and sever cleanly, and the edges are of the mouth. Makes a clean cut between the parts of the body that are obedient and the parts that are not, whether it be in your individual life or the body as a whole. The leaders, the stars, the messengers, and those following the words, the mouth, the report of that leader, messenger, will be severed from the body that goes into the land as first fruits, if they're following the wrong message, if they're hearing the wrong word. Because the word that is coming from the messenger's mouth is the same word, should be the same sharp sword that comes from the mouth of our Messiah. Because when we hear his word from the mouth of those that are messengers to us, it should cut. Because if it's not that sharp word, it's not going to do its job. The flock is a reflection of their messenger, of their shepherd, and should be following a prescribed path that's been laid out before us. This path that we are to be following is a spiritual path, is the path of the Spirit. Because the sword is the Spirit is the Word, the sword of the Spirit is the word Elohim, it is Debar Yah, they are all one. So what comes from the mouth, even what he originally breathed from the mouth, was the Spirit, was the Word. They're still all one. Now let's move on and take a look at this sword. And as we go into looking at this sword and the other places we see the double-edged sword and the sword in Scripture, we're going to really start to dig in and see what we've discovered actually in the definitions and the tracing back of the words, how that looks from a Hebraic, really in the context of a Hebraic understanding. So we have our word sword, and here it's 4501. And as I said before, there's another word for sword in the Greek, traces back to the same Hebrew word for sword. 4501, foreign origin, long, broad, cutlass, any weapon of the kind, literally or figuratively. We see it at Genesis 3:24. It's actually the first use of the word. It is sword. 27:19. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword, which turned every way, poured out its contents, to keep El-Tah the way of the tree of life. So the H2719, cherub, from 2717 means drought, also a cutting instrument, from its destructive effect, as a knife, sword, or other sharp implement. It traces back in the ancient Hebrew lexicon to 2199N. And let me say right here, because I haven't even mentioned it yet, if you don't have this ancient Hebrew lexicon by Jeff Benner, it is almost the end-all to all resources as far as Scripture is concerned. Certainly doesn't take the place of your Scripture, but it gives us such an in-depth understanding of Scripture. So at the N, we see it's a sword, a weapon used to lay waste to a city, which would be the inhabitants in the city, because the sword is not going to kill the buildings and the tents. The sword is coming after the people. The second definition is waste, a dry or desolate place. We see the action is waste, the concrete is sword. So again, we saw it at Genesis 3:24. We see it's a het, a resh, and a bait. So this flaming sword in Genesis 3:24, which is the first place we see it at, divides het, that which or who will be with the head of man, resh, in his house bait. It is turning every way. That definition is pouring out its contents. It's guarding by means of the L to the Taw in its proper order, because what the word is made of is the L to the Taw, the way, the Hebraic. Yeshua is the way to the tree of life, and Yeshua is the tree of life. So how do we get back? What does that look like? Where do we see a picture of that? In our scriptures. Turning to Hebrews chapters 3 and 4, I would encourage everyone to get out their scriptures and follow along. It'll be easier to see than on the screen. Therefore, and you can look above and see what it's there for, set apart brothers, those who have been set apart, who are doing the will of Yahweh Elohim, partakers, co-heirs of the heavenly calling. Closely consider the emissary and high priest, the one who was the high priest in the garden, the one who is the high priest in this book of our confession, the anointed priest, prophet, and king, Yah, who came to rescue us. Being trustworthy, comma, the maker himself, comma, as also Moshe in all his house. You see, when you do a Greek analysis on this verse, some of these words are not in there. So he himself was trustworthy, himself being the maker. That word appointed is not appointed when you trace it back into the Hebrew. As also Moshe in all his house was trustworthy. He existed as trustworthy, just as the maker did, on a human level. For this one has been deemed worthy of more esteem than Moshe, right? As much as he who built the house enjoys more respect than the house. He who built the house was the one who was trustworthy. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all is Elohim. He built it all. How many makers do we have? And Moshe indeed was trustworthy, there we see it, in all his house as a servant, for a witness of what would be spoken. But Yah, who came to rescue us, the anointed priest, prophet, and king, the house's seed over his own house, whose house we are if we hold fast the boldness and the boasting of the expectation firm to the end. How many masters over his house are there? How many builders? There's one. We see it in the very beginning. Therefore, as the set-apart Spirit says, the Ruach HaKodesh is going to say something. He's going to put forth a word, because he is the word. It is his word. Today, right now, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial, in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. They tried him 10 times, and there was a point at which the proverbial straw broke the proverbial camel's back, and all that generation died in the wilderness. Enough becomes enough. Therefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways, the way back, the way to walk to get back. As I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. Look out, brothers, lest there be any of you a wicked heart, of unbelief, of not having faith, of not standing firm, in falling away from the living Elohim. He's alive. But encourage one another daily, while it is called today. Encourage, extol, exhort, comfort even, lest any of you be hardened by the deceivableness of sin, of missing the mark. For we have become partakers of the Messiah, if we hold fast the beginning of our trust firm to the end. While it is said today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion. Rebellion will keep you from the land. It will keep you from going into the millennial reign. For who, having heard, rebelled? Was it not all who came out of Mitzrayim, led by Moshe? This was the bride that was headed to the mount. They all rebelled. And with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not those who sinned whose corpses fell in the wilderness? Because the proverbial straw broke the proverbial camel's back after they tried him and tried him and tried him and grumbled and complained? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they were unable to enter in because of their unbelief. Unable, not, the opposite of complete. They were not complete in following what he said. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. There's a promise that there's a day that we're going to enter into his rest. We're going to cross over into the land, and the truth is going to lead us into the land, and all this other stuff is going to be cut down, knocked out. For indeed the good news was brought to us as well as to them. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. They didn't stand firm on it. For we who have believed do enter into that rest. As he said, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. So we see that there was a creation rest, as we rest each and every Sabbath, that as the land rested each and every seventh year, that there will be a day when we cross over into that land. But right now, we rest every seventh day as a picture of what he did. And in this again, if they shall enter into my rest, he is tying the seventh day Sabbath into the rest that's going to come. Since then, it remains for some to enter into it. It remains for some. And those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience. He again defines a certain day, today, saying through David so much later, today, as it has been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Yehoshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that, because Yehoshua could not provide eternal rest like Yeshua ben Yahweh is going to provide the eternal rest. But there's a picture of it in the Torah. So there remains a Sabbath keeping. It's a lesson for us. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. For the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as Elohim from his own. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest. Praise Yah. Everything we can do to obey and not disobey, not fall short, not miss the mark, and teach others to do the same, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. For the word Elohim is living. We don't want to fall away from the living Elohim, and working, and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to the dividing of being and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Yah who came to rescue us, the house's seed, Elohim himself, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tried in all respects as we are, apart from sin. Therefore, let us come boldly to the throne of favor in order to receive compassion and find favor for timely help. Disobedience will cut you off from drawing near. So we need to be able to come boldly before him. And while there are so many more things that could be said in those two chapters, we're going to see a clear picture of these things as they come together in the Torah. I do want to look at first this sharp two-edged sword, Hebrews 4 verses 12 and 13. We read in the scriptures, "For the word Elohim, Debaria, is living and working and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to the dividing of being and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account." And our account is before our Maker, and there is only one Maker and builder and master and owner of the house. So, let's start with soul and spirit. Soul in the Greek is H5590, and you guys can do the trace back on these. I would encourage you to go back and do these trace backs, whether you do them through the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, whether you do them through the Greek Concordance to the Septuagint, whether you do them on your e-sword. I actually prefer the Greek Concordance to the Septuagint because you get a much clearer picture, and then you can actually see the verses for yourself in the Polyglot or the King James or your scriptures. So, again, encourage you to go and do some of this research. But it traces back to the Strong's H5315, Nefesh, from 5314, properly a breathing creature, that is animal or abstractly vitality, used very widely in a literal, accommodated, or figurative sense, bodily or mental. In looking in the ancient Hebrew lexicon by Benner, we see that it's at 2424N, soul. At the root, the action is refresh, the concrete is soul, the whole of a person, the body, the breath, and the mind. So in the Strong's, we see the definition is vitality. Actually, that's the act of living, animation. And in the lexicon by Benner, the whole of a person, the body, breath, and mind. So we have to make up our mind, sight seen or sight unseen, how we're going to live. We have to perform those actions with our body. We have to have it do the will of Yah. And we also have emotions involved in this act of living as well. And none of this, of course, vital living would be possible without Yah having first breathed the breath of life into the Nefesh. Looking at the word spirit, G4151, which I don't have up here on the screen, but I will read you the definition from the Strong's Concordance. From 4154, a current of air, that is, breath, blast, or a breeze. By analogy or figuratively, a spirit, that is, human, the rational soul, by implication, vital principle, mental disposition, etc., or superhuman, as an angel, demon, or divine El, Messiah spirit, or the Ruach HaKodesh. Tracing it back into the ancient Hebrew lexicon, we see that it's at 1445 JN, and the N is wind, Also the wind of man, R and L, the breath. At the J, the action is to refresh, the concrete is wind. The Hebrew nomads were very familiar with the wind patterns, as they would follow the prescribed path indicating the coming season. From the word comes the idea of breath, as it is the wind of man which also follows a prescribed path of inhaling and exhaling. At the two-letter root, we see the resh and the het. The action is to travel, the concrete is a path. The pictograph resh is a picture of the head of man, and the het is a picture of a wall that separates the inside from the outside. Combined, these mean man outside. The responsibilities of the nomad outside of the tent include the feeding, watering, and caring for the livestock. Livestock are healthier and more productive when on a routine. Seems to me many times we're referred as livestock in the scriptures. Therefore, a man follows a routine or a prescribed path each day when caring for his livestock. We see right here, even in this definition of spirit, a picture of the shepherd and the sheep, a picture of the shepherd of sheep, or the carer of the livestock, taking care of the livestock or of the sheep and leading them on a prescribed path. And it easily severs between the joints and the marrow. The joints are G719 and articulation of the body. In the Webster's Dictionary, in anatomy, the joining or juncture of the bones. This word was not traceable through the polyglot or the Greek concordance to the Septuagint, and the word which it came from the same as had something to do with a chariot. So I went to the Hebrew New Testament and looked it up in the Aramaic Hebrew, and I have it in black there. It's in the middle line, and it's Dal Beit Kuf. We see it in the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon at 2092. It's got a couple definitions there. The noun is a fastener, what joins together. The verb is adhere, to join or stick to someone or something. We see the action is adhere, and the concrete is a fastener. And as we know, the joints fasten the bones together so that the bones can move. When we look at the word marrow, we trace it back. It is G3452, Job 21:24. We see it goes to the Hebrew H4221. It's Ancient Hebrew Lexicon 1284 JN, marrow. Looking back up the root line, we see it's the mem het. The action is to strike. The concrete is marrow. The pictograph mem is a picture of water or other liquid. The het is a picture of a wall that separates the inside from the outside. We see a lot of separating going on here. Combined, these mean liquid inside. The marrow is a buttery liquid inside the bones and is used as a choice food. To obtain the marrow, the bone must be struck to break it open. So we have these joints, this sharp two-edged sword separating the joints, what holds the bones of the body together, and the marrow. Well, the joints don't hold the marrow together. The joints fasten the bones to each other to cause them to move. So what does this have to do with marrow? Because inside the bone, in the marrow, is where the cells, the blood cells, are made. And inside the blood cells are the DNA. So the DNA in the blood that's carried throughout the body, that bring life, carries life throughout the body, are made in the marrow. It's a picture of the blood that's running through us and the body being joined together, and those parts that aren't joined to the correct function, to following everything from the L to the taw, causing there to be life as opposed to death, those will be severed from the body. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, and so forth. And this sharp two-edged sword is also going to sever between the thoughts and intents of the heart. and inside the heart is planted the two seeds. So let's look at thoughts. Greek 1761. From G1760, deliberation. The 1760 comes from a compound of 1722 and 2372, to be inspirited, that is to ponder. Tracing back the 1760, because you cannot trace back the 1761, we see it at 1 Chronicles 28:9. We see in the King James, it reads, "And thou, Solomon my son, know thou the Elohim of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart." This is David speaking. "And with a willing mind. For Yahweh searcheth all hearts, and understandeth all the imaginations of the thoughts." So there we see our words for thoughts. It is 4284. In the Strong's comes from 2803. A contrivance, that is concretely a texture, a machine, or abstractly intention, plan, whether bad a plot or good advice. So we see in the ancient Hebrew lexicon, it's at 2213, A1, AF1 actually, but we also see it at AF2. We have the same Hebrew word, one ending in a hey and one ending in a taw. It's a design, a designing or planning of inventions or plans. At the root, we see the action is to design. The abstract is invention, the process of designing a pattern or plan for an action or device. And Benner has it coming from the shin bait, which is pressing back to the tent, shub, turning over thoughts is what he has there. So we see here these thoughts, plan and build and design and invent, to decide what we're going, or what someone is going to do. And Yah searches the hearts. So again, we see these thoughts can be bad, as in a plot, or good, as giving advice. And the intents are Strong's Greek 1771, from a compound of 1722 and 3563, thoughtfulness, that is moral understanding. The 3563 is probably from the vase of 1097, the intellect, that is mind, divine or human, in thought, feeling, or will, by implication meaning. We trace it back, we find it at Proverbs 2:11. At 2:11 we see understanding is H8394, that's our English word. We have some kind of understanding. The intent comes with an understanding. 1037 JI in the ancient Hebrew lexicon, intelligence, one able to plan and build. At the J we see the action is plan, the abstract is intelligence. The skill of the mind and hands to build. Before the tent is constructed, the location and orientation must be carefully considered according to weather, view, and size. The planning and building of a house, structure, or family. At the two-letter root, we see Ben, which is our two-letter root for son, or the house's seed. Whose house are we building according to? The action is build, the concrete is tent panel, the abstract is intelligence. The bait is the tent, the noon is the seed and represents continuity. As the seed continues, the next generation. The combined meaning of these letters is the continuing of the house. In Yahoo came to rescue us case, the house's seed. The tent was constructed of woven goat hair, and we see the definition goes on to explain about the tent panels being replaced one at a time. So these intents are actually intelligence. It's an understanding. We have an understanding of what needs to be done. So what are we building? So as we saw in Hebrews, there was a generation that grieved Yah. They went astray in their heart. They did not know his ways, and they were not able to enter in to his rest. So we find the last place where they ended up, the proverbial straw broke the proverbial camel's back, and they were all smitten in the wilderness, except those that gave the good report, that believed Jah. We find them back at the Midbar, or Numbers 13 and 14, where this incident took place. So let's start with Numbers 13. And Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of those who would rule with me, with El. Send one man from each tribe of their fathers, every one a leader among them. And by the mouth, the pay of Yah, Moshe sent them from the wilderness of Paran, all of them men who were heads of the children of those who were supposed to rule with El. So these were their leaders. These were the people, the leaders that were going to bring back the message. They were called leaders. So let's stop there at 3 and look at some things to just kind of confirm this. So we see our mouth at Strong's 6310, and we've saw it before in the double-edged and in the mouth, same mouth. This is from by the mouth of Yah, Moshe sent them. Moshe didn't do this himself. We see at the N its mouth, at the A its mouth. The action is below the concrete is mouth, the pictograph pay is a mouth. The edge of anything, such as the place of a beard, a sword, a region. So by the mouth of Yah. What comes out of his mouth? His word. What's the word made up of? Everything from the El to the Taw. He is the El to the Taw. He is the word. The Spirit was telling him what to do. They're all one. So by the mouth of Yah. Sent them from the wilderness. Where are we at today? We are in the wilderness. So his mouth was sending forth something through Moshe that was going to divide, separate between the soul and the spirit, the joints and the marrow, and the thoughts and intents of their hearts. And where were they at? The same place we are today, in the wilderness. Midbar, a place of order, a sanctuary. Second one, speech, an arrangement of words. Comes from debar, word, means order. An arrangement or placement of something creating order. We need to get ourselves in order here and be following those who are in order and who are giving the good word, the good advice by the Spirit of Yah, through the word of Yah. That's why the two-edged sword is sitting next to the messengers in Revelation, because we need to be very, very, very careful who we're listening to out here in the wilderness, because some are going to cause us to be in order and some are not. And what wilderness were they in? The wilderness of Paran, age 6290, coming from 6286. 6286 is a primitive root to glean, that is causatively embellish, figuratively to boast, also to explain, that is make clear oneself, denominatively from 6288 shake a tree. So we see in the ancient Hebrew lexicon it's at 1388 DV, decorate. The D, the concrete, is a decoration. The fruits that grow on the branches of a tree as decorations. And this is one of the root lines where we get the English word translated as fruit sometimes. So we are in the wilderness of the place where we're supposed to be coming into order so that we can be fruits, decorative, embellishments. So go ahead and follow this word around a little bit, see where it goes. Fruits, bearing fruit, with endurance unto Yah. Continuing on with verses 4 through 20. I'm not going to read 4 through 15. You can go back and read those. Check into some of those names. See what you find. I do want to point out in verses 6, we have from the tribe of Yehuda, Caleb, son of Yefuneh. And verse 8, from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, son of Nun, whose name was changed to Yehoshua, Joshua, the seed from the house of the seed that continues. I mean, what a picture that is. A foreshadow of Yeshua HaMashiach, our forerunner for us. So going down into verse 17, well, we see these men are supposed to be the leaders, the heads, the messengers. They were called. These are the names of the men whom Moshe sent to spy out the land. And Moshe called Hosea, the son of Nun, Yehoshua. And Moshe sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, Go up here into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, and the people who dwell in it, whether strong or weak, whether few or many, and whether the land they dwell in is good or evil, whether the cities they inhabit are in camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests or not. And you shall be strong, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first fruits of grapes. So they were supposed to bring a report about every aspect of the land. So I just kind of want to look at a couple things in here, because this sharp two-edged sword is going to divide between soul and spirit, joints and marrow, thoughts and intents. Those who are following the messengers with a good report are those who follow the messengers with an evil report. And if they're going to be the first fruits and bring the first fruits, or they're not. So in verse 20, we saw that one of the things that the spies were supposed to check into was whether the people that dwelleth in the land were strong or were they weak. And so we see this word strong in the ancient Hebrew lexicon at 2152N. Strong, the strength of something that refrains or supports. At the V line, which is the same word as the noun, same Hebrew letters, is to seize, to grab hold tightly, to refrain or support by grabbing hold. At the root there, we see the action is to seize, the abstract is strength, a strong grabbing hold to refrain or support. We also see the same word for strength was actually told to Yehoshua several times. Be strong and courageous. And this is the word that was strong. Be strong by grabbing hold of and seizing the Torah, the Torot that was given to him, that was given to all of them, the words that came from Yah through the mouth of Moshe. These people that were in that land were not strong in that sense, as those who rule with El are supposed to be strong in that sense. Or were they weak? We see the weak coming from 1454 HN, which is weak. We see it the V, which is the same Hebrew word, to be weak from sickness, laziness, or work. At the two-letter root, we see the resh pei. The action is heal, the concrete is medicine, the abstract is sick. The resh is the head of man, the pei is an open mouth. Combined, these mean man open. Wounds, sicknesses, and illnesses are cured with medicines made from plant materials, which are pulverized into medicinal powder. So were these people sick? Were they sin sick? This is the same place where we were healed, the same root line. By his stripes we were healed. These people were not following the head, the words that were breathed from the beginning, and they did not have the revelation of Yah. They were actually weak. They were not strong in the things of Yah. The question is, do we have eyes to see that? And are we following the messengers that have eyes to see that as well, so that we end up on the right side of the wall, inside of the land in that day and time? Or will we be smitten? Let's continue reading in Midbar, Numbers 13, verses 21 to 33. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin, as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron. And Achman and Shishai and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Now Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Mitzrayim. And they came to the Wadi Eshcol, and cut down from there a branch with 1 cluster of grapes. And they bore it between 2 of them on a pole, also of the pomegranates and of the figs. That place was called the Wadi Eshcol, because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down from there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days, a period of testing. And they went and came to Moshe and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of those who were supposed to rule with El, in the wilderness, the place where they should have been getting themselves in order, of Paran, of the fruit, to in this embellishment, to bring forth the fruits unto Yah that were Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they reported to him and said, We went to the land where you sent us, and truly it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. But the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are walled, very great. And we saw the descendants of Anak there, too. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, while the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea, and along the banks of the Jordan. Looking back at verse 23, and they came to the Wadi Eshcol, and cut down from there a branch with 1 cluster of grapes. This cluster of grapes, there was 1, and there were many grapes on it, but the cluster was 1. And when you consider the word blood in the ancient Hebrew, you see that it also alludes to the grape plant that takes up water, and then the water becomes blood. So here we see a picture of our Messiah, the first fruits of the blood that he shed for us, and those that would come in underneath of him. And they bore it between 2 of them, I would say that was Caleb and Yehoshua, on a pole, also of the pomegranates, which is on the bottom of the robe of the high priest, and of the figs. So I just want to read a couple of parallel passages here. You go back and look these up and, search them out and let Yah speak to you. Hosea 9:10. When I found Yisrael, those who would rule with El, it was like finding grapes in the desert. When I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing the early fruit on the fig tree. And also in 1 Kings 4:25, Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, the well of the oath, all the days of Shlomo. So we see this beautiful picture of Messiah as our first fruits, the first fruit being shown to us in the land, and us coming in under the blood, under the high priest. And looking back at verse 20 in this same chapter, we see confirmation of this very thing. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes, the first fruits of the crop. We see 2016 ED, first fruits, comes from the verb of to be born or bear the first fruits. The first fruits of the crop are the womb. So we see these first ripe grapes being brought back from the land as a picture for those to see the blood of Messiah, and that we are supposed to be bearing those who would go, teaching them, bearing the first fruits that would go into the land underneath of our first fruit, the firstborn of creation, the firstborn from the dead, Yeshua Messiah. In verse 27, we saw, and they reported to him and said, We went to the land where you sent us, and truly it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. But who was truly of the messengers able to see the fullness of this picture as presented to them? Verse 28. But the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are walled very great. And we saw the descendants of Anak there too. So they saw that they were strong. And this is not the same word we saw for strong before, but it actually plays the same picture in the Hebrew. It is strong, vehement, harsh. We know the giants in the land look strong. They are vehement and they are very harsh. But it comes from an ancient Hebrew perspective, according to Benner's lexicon, to know your weapon. So while these giants may know some sort of weapon, they do not know the weapon of Yah, which is to be obedient, grab hold of, and seize the Torah, the Torot of Yah that was spoken from his mouth. So that some of the spies were not able to see past who they were and come to the place where the being obedient to Yah can overtake any giant in the land. Finishing out this chapter, let's look at verses 30 through 33. And Caleb silenced the people before Moshe and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are certainly able to overcome it." They would be able, not unable, if they would be obedient to what Yah had said to them, just as we saw in Hebrews. They were unable to go into his rest because they were not complete in following the obedience of Yah to overcome these giants. Verse 31, But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not unable, because they did not have the belief to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel an evil report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land eating up its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. And we saw there the Nephilim, sons of Anak of the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in their eyes." So while there are many things that could be said about many of the Hebrew words that are, all of the Hebrew words that are in this set of verses, I specifically want to look at the evil report. H1681, Deba, from 1680, in the sense of furtive motion, slander. And when we look at the definition for furtive in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, stolen, obtained by theft. Jeff Benner's Ancient Hebrew Lexicon, 1071 AN1, slander, speaking evil of another, usually done quietly. At the family, concrete is slow, something that is slow and quiet. Two-letter, parent root, action is to rest. The pictograph dal is a picture of the door, the tent door, and the bait is a picture of a tent. Combined, these mean door of the tent. The door of the tent was the place of relaxation for the father. Here he would watch his family, livestock, and the road for approaching visitors. This root is related to the root beit dal, a reversal of the letters. So these spies brought a slanderous report against the land and the fact that they could overcome it. A slanderous report against Yah himself. We see that this evil report would then divide those that would be the parts of the body that would go into the land from those that wouldn't go into the land. It would divide the joints and the marrow. It would divide those whose mind and emotions and will went one direction, following one prescribed path, from the other set that were following another prescribed path. It would divide between the thoughts and intentions. Those who had thoughts of building and designing Yah's house as sons, seeds from the house of Elohim, divided from those that would be building another house. Oh, let's go back to Mitzrayim. So we see here in these three letters, the dal, the door, the bait, the tent, or the family that's inside, and the hay, the little man with his arms raised, that this evil report would cause them to not be able to go through the door into the land as part of the family, to be there for what Yah had revealed to them. So in chapters 14, verses 1 through 9, then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel, those who were supposed to rule with El, grumbled against Moshe and against Aaron. And all the congregation said to them, they grumbled against the Torot, and they grumbled against the priesthood. If only we had died in the land of Mitzrayim, or if only we had died in this wilderness, the place where they were supposed to be getting themselves into order and cleansed. And why is Yahweh bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? They wouldn't have been falling by the sword had they listened to the words, the sword that came from the mouth of Yah, that came through Moshe, that sent the spies out to spy the land. That our wives and our children should become prey. Would it not be better for us to turn back to Mitzrayim? And they said to each other, let us appoint a leader, and let us turn back to Mitzrayim. Then Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. And Yehoshua son of Nun, and Caleb son of Yephuneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their garments. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If Yahweh has delighted in us, then he shall bring us into this land, and give it to us, a land which is flowing with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against Yahweh, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their defense has turned away from them, and Yahweh is with us. Do not fear them. So we see them telling them, if Yahweh has delighted in us, he shall bring us into this land, a land which is flowing with milk and honey. They had to make up their mind. If they believed the report, not only that it was a good land, but they were able to overcome the giants. They had to make up their mind that they were not going to rebel. They were not going to move their body, their will, in a different direction. And not to fear, not to have this emotional reaction to the people of the land. Just a quick overview of verses 10 through 19. We see the people wanting to stone Yehoshua and Caleb. We see Yah wanting to know how long he should let the people scorn him in this manner and wanting to strike them. We see Moshe saying to Yah, why would you do this to this people? Because now all the enemies are going to say, why did you bring the people out of the land in order just to kill them? They would say because Yah was not able to bring this people into the land. And actually, it had nothing to do with Yah. It had everything to do with the people. And so we come down to verse 20. And Yahweh said, I shall forgive according to your word. But truly, as I live, and all the earth is filled with the esteem of Yahweh. For no one of these men who have seen my esteem, and the signs which I did in Mitzrayim and in the wilderness, and have tried me now these 10 times, and have disobeyed my voice, shall see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor any of those who scorned me. Disobedience will keep us from getting in to the land. We must obey the voice of Yah, and that's exactly what we saw in Hebrews. The sword is going to divide. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit, a different ruach, on a different prescribed path, in him, he's got a different spirit in him, and has followed me completely. I shall bring into the land where he went, and his seed shall inherit it. Since the Amalekites and the Canaanites are dwelling in the valley, turn back tomorrow and set out into the wilderness by the way of the Sea of Reeds. And Yahweh said to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, How long shall this evil congregation have this grumbling against me? Dysfunctional congregation. I have heard the grumblings which the children of Israel are grumbling against me. Say to them, As I live, declares Yahweh, as you have spoken in my hearing, so I do to you. The carcasses of you who have grumbled against me are going to fall in this wilderness. All of you who were registered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above. None of you except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Yehoshua, son of Nun, shall enter into the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. Again, Caleb followed Yahweh completely. Him and Yehoshua were the only ones who would be going into that land. We need to be so familiar with the truth that the people that are bringing us the message, if they come as false prophets, that we be able to recognize it immediately. That we not follow the masses into disobedience, but follow the small group, the small crowd, the small remnant, O ye little flock, into the land at the first resurrection. Real quick confirmation, as we can see here on the slide, that existed in Caleb another H312 spirit, Ruach, H7307, with him. And he followed Yah fully. So we see this another is 1181CN in the ancient Hebrew lexicon. It's after, a time to come beyond another event. Other, a time, person, or thing that follows after. We see at the sea, the action is to delay, the concrete is back. Rather than work in the heat of the sun, one waits until the breeze of the day. We see the het is the wall, the resh is the man. Combined, these mean outside man. A man outside the desert sun becomes pale and hot. So we see that he followed with this another. It's closely. He follows closely the other spirit that was not being followed by the masses that wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. Then we see here the word followed me and fully. The word fully is fill, and then we see the action is to fill. The concrete is first fruits, a conglomerate of ingredients for filling up something. At the root, the action is speak, the concrete is word, the abstract is continue, a continuation of the segments which fill the whole. And we also see that followed me fully has an H310 after it, which is the same word we saw above for the word another spirit. Both 310 and 312 are the same word. So the closer that you're following the first fruit that's in the land to be in the first resurrection, well, you'll be in the first resurrection. And we see it Numbers 27:18 about Yehoshua as well. And Yahweh said unto Moshe, Take thee Yehoshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thine hand upon him. And so we see just confirmation of the things that were spoken of in this passage of Scripture. So now that we've got a little better Hebrew perspective on things, let's read these verses in Hebrews again. Hebrews 4, verses 11 through 13. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. For the word Elohim is living and working and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to the dividing of the soul and the spirit, what we will think, what we will feel and what we will do with that, and the spirit that's guiding us, and the joints and the marrow, the parts of the body that are going in and the parts of the body that are not, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions, whether we're designing and planning and building, and the seed of which house we're designing and planning and building for is the one that we're feeding in our hearts. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. Revelation 1:16, and in his right hand he held 7 stars, the 7 messengers of the 7 assemblies. And out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was as the sun shining in its strength. Which messenger, which leader, which head of which assembly are we listening to? Revelation 19, verse 11 to 21. So how does it all shake out with this sword? And I saw the Shemaim opened, and there was a white horse. And he who sat on him was called trustworthy, was called faithful. He was firm and true, the truth, because he is the truth. And in righteousness he judges and fights. He divides between obedience and disobedience. He judges and he fights for obedience and against disobedience. And his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, having a name that had been written, which no one had perceived except himself. And having been dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word Yahweh. And the armies in the heavens, dressed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Those would be the righteous. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of El Shaddai. One thing we don't see about the sword in this verse when we look in the scriptures is that this is actually a double-edged sword according to the polyglot, according to your Septuagint version of the scriptures. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, Sovereign of Sovereigns, 1. And Master of Masters, 1. And I saw one messenger standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, Come, gather together for the supper of the great Elohim, to eat the flesh of sovereigns, and the flesh of commanders, and the flesh of strong ones, and the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all the people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast and the sovereigns of the earth, and their armies gathered together to fight him, who sat on the horse, and his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he led astray those who received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. What are you thinking about? What is on our minds? And what are we doing with our hands? Are we in our minds, and in our emotions, and in our will, what we do, following what Yah said to do, and following those who have come to speak for him, the words that they're putting forth of Yah? Who are we following? All in all, we should be following our king, our master, our high priest. But we need to make sure whose ever messages that we're listening to, they fall under the correct assembly. The 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire burning with sulfur, and the rest were killed with the sword, because the word of Yah kills, which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. That sword is going to divide the disobedient from the obedient. And in the end, it's going to kill. Let's read those again. Which side of the sword, which side of the fence do we want to be on when the sword comes down? Revelation 19:15. And out of his mouth goes a sharp 2-edged sword, that with it he should smite the nations. and he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of El Shaddai. Verse 21. And the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. Looking in the theological word book of the Old Testament, the sword is said to devour its victims in Deuteronomy 32:42, 2 Samuel 2:26, and 2 Samuel 11:25. So are we on our way back to the tree of life, where they were kicked from the garden for disobedience in the first place? And Yahweh Elohim said, See, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put out his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. So Yahweh Elohim sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. And he drove the man out, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Which side of the sword are we going to fall on? We simply have too much access to information, too much access to what Yah originally breathed, to not be Bereans for ourselves, to not look into everything that everyone is speaking to us, every message that we hear, and be able to discern which is leading us into obedience and which is leading us into disobedience. Hallelujah.